Adding to a string of high-voltage diplomatic jockeying, the North Atlantic Security Organization, or the NATO, has concluded its annual summit in Washington, D.C. Founded in 1949, the year 2024 marks its 75th anniversary. The summit, seen as the pinnacle of West's alliance outlook, created an interesting contrast with India acing the multi-alignment game. PM Modi's long-awaited trip to Moscow was subtly balanced by a subsequent trip to Austria, first ever trip by an Indian Prime Minister in 40 years. The signalling therein gave all parties, especially the exhilarated commentariat, leeway to infer their own readings. Two factors made this year's NATO summit crucial. One, the alliance's support to Ukraine in its long-standing war against Russia has been haunted by the rising possibility of a Trump comeback in the White House, which looks all the way more likely now after his failed assassination attempt. And two, the augmenting focus on China draws the Indo-Pacific security theater within NATO's purview. So this merging of theatres, getting inevitable by the day, has not been welcomed by everyone in the region, and understandably so. The non-Western world has vivid memories of what perpetuated when NATO went global the last time. Bloodshed and rampage in Iraq and Afghanistan. How far can the new global avatar of NATO be engaged productively will be determined by the right communication pathways with a clear focus on issues of convergence in the Indo-Pacific. Now, from India's perspective, the biggest convergence is on the question of China. However, instead of a formal engagement with the alliance, which is not even on the table actually, an informal dialogue building on NATO's focus on hybrid threats in the Indo-Pacific must be the communication matrix. So this focus was first iterated by the alliance's key policy document called the Strategic Concept in 2022 and then repeated at later summits in Vilnius and the current one in DC. That said, twin dynamics of supporting Ukraine and increased focus on the engagement with the Indo-Pacific, these two things are directly related with the question of resources that seems in doldrums considering that more than half of the defense budget of the NATO comes from the US alone. Today, there are parallel drains to its defense assistance with, for example, aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, and commitments to Taiwan, along with replenishing its own stocks. Now, Trump has publicly reiterated cutting down on US contribution to NATO, as well as tapering down support to Kyiv. So, how does the road to Trump-proofing look? While on the one hand, transformational changes have been initiated in the alliance to not only Trump-proof Ukraine, but also itself, the limitations of what can be achieved in real time have never been so obvious. In the European theatre, some key decisions have been taken for Trump-proofing Ukraine and European security, and I have written a great deal about it. Adding to earlier efforts, NATO has committed $40 billion for Ukraine, making it the first direct military assistance package. Until now, the military assistance was being sent by NATO member states and not the alliance itself. There's a difference. The distribution of this military aid has been spearheaded by the Defense Contact Group in Ramstein in Germany, which is joined by several more countries than just the NATO members. NATO members are only 32, whereas those in the Ramstein group are close to 50. Then there's a decision to have a NATO liaison office in Kyiv with appointing a liaison officer to oversee the working of the day-to-day matters on the recently declared aid. And that has been a step forward in helping Ukraine. Additionally, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has announced that the US has started the transfer of F-16 jets to Ukraine after Russia's coordinated airstrikes on a children's hospital in Kyiv, right as Prime Minister Modi was being received by President Putin. Now, that diplomatic discomfort was palpable in Prime Minister's statements to President Putin the next day as he condemned the killing of children in wars at large, aiming both at Ukraine and Gaza. The wrong timing of the hospital attack could be a setback to Indian leadership's consistent commitment to peace-building efforts in Ukraine, urges to stop the war and find diplomatic solution instead. Nonetheless, whether the announcement regarding en route F-16s would really help Kyiv to repel air attacks in a significant manner remains to be seen. Now, while Ukraine has revolutionized deploying an array of FPV drones, but so has Russia upgraded its electronic warfare to jam its signals. Now, the use of AI-enabled drones that do not rely on jamming signals, operating on AI-guided targeting once the target is locked, remains limited in the battlefield as of now. In such a scenario, the use of F-16s could be most effective to take down glide bombs at the source, provided it is complemented by more air defense systems. Now, as per the latest reports, the US has announced sending at least 5 new air defense systems to Kyiv. That said, the painfully slow addition of a few units of this and that is not enough for a decisive turn in the war per se, even though it is bleeding the Russian military. And that brings me to ask the point of what is Ukraine's pursuit to NATO membership all about? Is it a veiled objective at best? Let's analyze. In the last year's summit at Vilnius, NATO members had decided to enter into separate, long-term and almost identical security agreements with Ukraine. The idea was to create a substitute for Ukraine's security until its membership sees the light of the day. However, fleeting days and months cast heavier clouds of incertitude over those prospects. That said, spearheaded by Germany and France, who signed parallel security agreements with Ukraine on the same day, other big powers have followed suit. Most consequential has been the US itself signing a long-term security agreement with Ukraine on the sidelines of the recently held G7 summit in Italy. In addition, Japan became the first non-transatlantic country to have concluded the same bilateral security agreements with Ukraine. The common thread between all of these security agreements is the long-term focus on defense industry cooperation with Ukraine. However, all of the above still do not offset the lack of a commitment to NATO membership, which, at least in the present circumstances, sounds more like an aspirational goal and less like an achievable aim, with a clear timeline. Now, many from the non-Western world hold on to the view that it was the pursuit of NATO that landed Ukraine in this existential war of grinding attrition. There is no dearth of analyses that do not accord any real agency either to Ukraine or to the countries of the erstwhile Warsaw Pact or the Soviet bloc. Misinterpreting the notion of great power politics, the only relevant actors in this narrative are the US and Russia. Everything else fades into background. No matter how theatrical it sounds, that is not how the world looks like when viewed through the East European lens, regardless of what the rest of the world likes to imagine on their behalf. The onus of supporting Ukraine will fall on the shoulders of Europe, that is quickly putting together new strategies to militarize itself and support Ukraine in its long war. New Labour government in the UK has pledged its full support to Ukraine, and Emmanuel Macron in France has brilliantly avoided getting locked in an awkward cohabitation with the far right. I hope you remember the drama there. The new NATO chief, Mark Rutte, is a committed security hawk, and the EU Parliament results have shown that Ursula von der Leyen is all set to come back as the Commission president soon. And she's going to be joined by another pro-European security leader from Estonia, a very famous one now, Kaja Kallas. So, doubts notwithstanding, public support for Ukraine and European security has also not fallen below 1 to 1.5%, even after 3 years of this war. But all that regardless, the crucial element here is time. All the above will make little difference if Trump proofing is not sturdy enough to hold against the MAGA onslaught. With a bandaged ear and high spirits, Trump seems to make a comeback soon. What would that mean for Europe and the war in Ukraine? Not good news, of course. I will be back to discuss that and more. Stay tuned.